Okay, so advanced comparisons. What does it mean? Well, in this particular case, it means that you are going to sound not only understandable and correct, but also natural by using idiomatic expressions, similes, proverbs, sayings, lexicalized analogies, and all the rest of it. So let's dive in. Okay, the greatest benefits of using idiomatic expressions is you sound natural. And people relate to you like, this guy knows what he's talking about. I feel that he knows my language. You can be interesting because, being speaking at an upper intermediate level can be a little boring, a little stiff, and creative only in exceptional cases. I don't believe that that belongs in the C1, C2 syllabus. That is for professional writers, poets, comedians. Natural, yes, that's the reaction that you elicit from speakers. They go like, yes, yes, that's how we talk, that's how it's done. All right, interesting, because you may have 4 or 5 different options, and you're able to choose one that is different, that is stimulating, that puts a mental picture in your conversation partner. And I chose this this image because this guy became a national sensation in Spain in the 1990s for many different reasons. But one of them, I believe, is his ability to use fresh, original similes. He always could come up with some unexpected comparison. So it's kind of relevant. We want to get to that point where we make our conversation, our speech, stimulating. Okay. Equality. So let's start with equality, superiority. Ideally, if you are a competent speaker, you might sense a common denominator among these pictures. Do you get it? Do you know what I'm going on about here? If you thought of similarity, you are right on the money. It's about similarity. Why? Because all expressions have to do with this looks like, or is like, or takes after. All right. Let's explore one case at a time. So I would call them, they are not proverbs, some of them are, but proverbial expressions. They are well known, they are conventions. Um, the one on the left refers to a tree, an apple tree to be more precise, and the expression is, of course, the apple never falls far from the tree. It means that if your father was a certain type of character, chances are you are going to be similar. I mean, not exactly the same, but if I mean, the analogy is obvious. You don't fall far from your um, origin in this particular case. The second image refers to like father, like son, which I've noticed that these days, there's a movement of people that want to try and start using like father, like daughter. So let's, in order not to be necessarily sexist. Anyway, these two expressions are well known, and you find them in a dictionary, which means that that is part of our goals. Very similar expressions, we have an idiom and a simile. This is the idiom and that is the simile. The idiom is an expression, this expression, he is a chip off the old block. The old block being your father or your mother, and you are like a little splinter that fell off of something. The comparison is, I think, self-explanatory. In the second case, it's not an idiom, it's an actual comparison. You say these two guys are as alike as two peas in a pod. The shorter version would be they are like two peas in a pod. All right. Because, can you tell them apart? You see 5 peas. Can you really tell them apart? I think it's a very effective simile. Standard analogies, better known as clichés. Now be careful, the word cliché in Spanish means stereotype. In English, it's defined as an expression that is trite, it has been abused and is no longer fresh or original. So basically not very interesting. One, you want to be an interesting speaker, a writer, but for an English learner, it's a must. So they start with like, sometimes with as, but you should know them. If only because sometimes, there is wordplay, there are variations on the expression that you should, by all means, know. Let's go back to this slide. Look at that bicycle. I don't need this at all. Imagine you want to say, I don't need this at all. You can say that, or you say, I need this like a fish needs a bicycle. You know, um, you compare the difference between saying I don't need this at all and I need this like a fish needs a bicycle. A lot more powerful, right? When you use the expression. All right, that dolphin right there is not exactly what we need here, but the expression, I feel like a fish out of water. Okay, maybe that dolphin might be jumping, is going to dive back in, but the feeling of being out of your element is like, you're flapping about, or you're just confused and you don't even know what to do. This I don't belong here, that all that can be encapsulated in that expression. Because if you say I feel confused, I don't know what to do, that's rather dull. And even if you say I am out of my element, but what element? What are you? So if you become, remember, the more specific you are, the more interesting you sound. So if you say, I feel like a fish out of water, that kind of makes it, um, I, not stimulating. I mean, because you should come up with your own original analogy, but that is not the point. We are C1, C2 learners. I mean, we should handle this. Then you might know other expressions. Okay, speaking of other expressions, let's look at options. So you say she makes quite an impression because she's different from the others, or you say these characters that the writer wrote, they are so different, so distinct, so well rounded, so they are properly fleshed out. You can go into like long-winded descriptions, but these expressions, she always gets noticed. They all have something in common. It's easy to pick her out of a crowd. She is distinctly different. She's swimming against the tide. Well, that goes in a different direction, but maybe there is a mainstream, and because she's a maverick or she's a rebel, she's swimming against the current or upstream. That's another expression that makes that point clear. I mean, she's different. Uh, it jumps out at you. I mean, it's so powerful, so different. So all these expressions go along the same lines. Um, how about this? Stands out like a sore thumb. This, she, he, it stands out. You can stop there. It stands out. Okay. But if you say like a sore thumb, what are the connotations? Well, sore thumb, not a beautiful sight. The words are not particularly poetic. The connotations are obvious. It's not a pleasant way of standing out. Okay, so that's one great reason for using the simile, because it offers more meaning, more semantic content. Yes, that is the usual tsunami of vocabulary, lots of expressions. But look on the bright side. The more expressions you have, the better options you get when you want to sound interesting, because you want to go in this direction, that other, that connotation. I want to be poetic. I want to be, funny, witty. So this is an interesting experiment. Let's assume that you don't know that expression, okay? I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that you don't. This is, well, a very similar idiom. It means the same thing. What do you feel? I mean, this is, whatever it is, this is like watching paint dry. Does that sound like fun, watching paint dry? No, and that's exactly the meaning. extremely boring. Once again, I have to ask you the same question. Do you see the difference between this is extremely boring and this is like watching paint dry? Like pulling teeth. What do you think of? What kind of mental picture does the expression conjure up? I mean, makes you think of something nice, something painless, maybe not. How about that? Look at that. It might be extremely difficult, but it has lots of connotations. It's difficult, but in a way that is potentially painful. Okay, so when you say, I wrote that novel, I recorded an album, or I sat through that conversation and it was like pulling teeth. So we come to the moment when we discuss similes. Now, similes, they may start as or as like. Let's go for the as, because we're discussing equality. As dead as a doorknob. Okay, nothing particularly interesting about this. I mean, it's a lot more interesting than just saying he was dead, or, the party, or dead is okay, it's pretty extreme, but it's just one adjective. When you use a simile, you make it slightly more colorful. But that is the one expression where we don't have much of a choice, unless you are original and you come up with your idiosyncratic comparison. But check this out. As white as, now the expression branches out into three potential options. We have this, as white as. I want to believe that you have thought of ghost, as white as a ghost. That is an expression that you find in a dictionary. Remember, we are learning conventions. We don't want to be poets. Not yet. Eventually, who knows? As white as a sheet, that's another option. Puts a different mental picture, all right, in your brain. And as white as snow sounds sort of poetic, all right? So maybe the meaning is exactly the same, but what the listener experiences is slightly different. As drunk as okay. Again, we have two options. One is British, the other one is American. I'm going to give you a clue. Do you know his name? No? You're too old to know his name? Well, his name is Star-Lord, all right? If you're too old for that, you might be maybe too young for this one. Do you identify that gentleman? He was a poet. Speaking of poets, Lord Byron. Do you sense a common denominator here? Yes. The expression is as drunk as a lord. Okay. And in America, they go for this little animal. What animal is that? That animal is the skunk. I don't know if the skunks drink a lot of alcohol. I doubt that. Probably they say as drunk as a skunk because it rhymes. He was as drunk as a skunk. Do you get the same emotion? Do you get the same reaction when you hear as drunk as a lord or as drunk as a skunk, or he was completely drunk? Okay, I'll say no more. So lexicalized analogies. As a matter of fact, I came up with this description, but they have become analogies that are implicit. They are inside the word, so they are no longer perceived as comparisons, but they are. So let's suppose you want to say something is really, really hot. Your options are, a comparison, it was as hot as hell, or this was hot as hell, because in our society, in our culture, the Judeo-Christian culture, the idea of hell is connected with maybe subterranean environment, unusually hot. Actually, there is an expression which is, I will date you when hell freezes over. It's never going to freeze over because it's full of fire and brimstone and all those the horrible, frightful views. The thing is, you say hot as hell. By the way, hell, some people use it as a blanket, a catch-all term. You say this is boring as hell, okay, which is not specific about anything being hot. Anyway, hot as hell. We're talking about being hot, not the way some of you may be thinking. Oh, he is really hot. She is really hot. Um, but it's slightly different. We're not talking about temperature there. But hot as hell. Okay, let's dispense with the fireballs in this. Hot as hell is specific. Piping hot, baking hot, and scorching hot are also specific. Now, there is a very subtle analogy in there. Baking hot suggests that you are in an oven, like, or you know, it's the sun is scorching hot, like it's scorching what the scenery. This is baking hot, like I feel like this is an oven. All right. If you're lazy, you can go for, and this is rather colloquial, verging on vulgar, bloody in Great Britain. Freaking are obvious replacements for the F bomb. But even extremely is sort of lame, and super is, well, you sound like a child if you say it was super hot, super hot. So I do not encourage this sort of language, all right? But the specific modifier is this. You say as dry as. Again, we have two options. Some people say as dry as dust, but as dry as a forces us to use as a bone. And that becomes this analogy. It is bone dry. You see, that element becomes a modifier. It's not an adjective. It's a noun that acts like an adjective. So it's not scorching, baking, piping. It's another noun that on a subliminal level reminds the speaker of that analogy, as dry as bone, as a bone. And we have dirt cheap, pitch black. Of course, you can go for the comparison and say it was as black as pitch, or it was pitch black, jet black, you know, jet black hair, stone cold. Do you see what we're dealing with here? It's the succinct, compact version of a full analogy. You don't need to go as, all right? Again, let's compare how you feel when you hear this, something descriptive versus something idiomatic. So supposing someone wants to convey these meanings: extremely tired, like death warmed up, not welcome at all. Now, our friend the skunk pops up again here, as well as a skunk at a lawn party. I think that summons an image that is unavoidable. You have to see, whoa, a skunk. We know what skunks are famous for, and really hungry. Even if you go and say, I am famished, ravenous, which are fine, that would be advanced vocabulary, but you elicit a different reaction from the listener. When you say she was eating like there was no tomorrow, or she was spending her money like there was no tomorrow, I think that it's more vivid and well, basically elicits a completely different reaction. So the muddy waters of connotations, concept and idiomatic expression. So when you say very tough, well, that's needless to say quite simple. If you say as tough as what? Now you have options here: nails, old boots, or leather. I would argue that there is not much of a difference when you say as tough as old boots or leather. They are made of leather, you know, the boots. So I don't see a big difference here. But when you say as quick as a wink, that has sort of a, you know, playful a ring to it, a wink, as lightning puts a different mental picture in your head. And as quick as silver, you have to be familiar with quicksilver maybe to understand what that means. That is a completely different scenario, in my opinion, because they are quite different from each other. As wise as Solomon or an owl. Now, let's dwell on that for a second. When you use Solomon as a reference, well, you have to be aware of the fact that it's a biblical character, it's a Jewish character, and in Judeo-Christian culture, that would be easily understandable. But come to think of an analogy used by a Chinese speaker that might say, I don't know, I'm just, improvising here, but imagine that it says, he is as wise as Chuang Tzu. I say Chuang Tzu. Who is Chuang Tzu? That can knock you off balance because you might not be, you might be confused by the reference. So in that particular case, if you use an animal, that is at least in this part of the world, almost ubiquitous, the owl, I think you have a better chance of being understood. So sometimes because of the connotations, sometimes because of the cultural references, it's not the same. What one element is not the same as the other. In this particular case, Cersei Lannister, how would you characterize this woman? Intimidating, scary, cruel. I remember that when I saw the series, I thought, oh my God, this is the quintessential, the proverbial Ice Queen. And indeed, that is what we're about to see now. So let's move on to the lexicalized metaphors. By that I mean the ones that you find in a dictionary. So they had, for the most part, they haven't been taken from some piece of literature. They have become, mainstream imagery. A roller coaster of emotions. Okay, well, so life is sometimes exciting, sometimes dreary, sometimes, again, exhilarating. So it's like a roller coaster. It's a self-explanatory metaphor. But notice that it's a metaphor because we don't say like or as. That's what we do with similes. This is different. You say that's looks like a diamond, but it's not cut. It's not polished. It's a diamond in the rough. Now this man, this young man, full of promise and potential, is a diamond in the rough. That is a metaphor in itself. All right. So it's like you crank it up a notch. You leave the similes and you go into maybe in a way a more sophisticated territory. So in terms of social types, look at this. A toothless tiger, an ice queen, battle axe, tough cookie, a loose cannon. All these noun phrases, really, they're nouns, have implicit metaphors. And at this point, I would like to remind you of a remark by my beloved Jorge Luis Borges. He once stated that most of the nouns of a language, of every language really, must have been a metaphor at some point. Because, I mean, come to think of it, even the very word metaphor is a metaphor. It means carry beyond. So we should be aware that this is the natural process. A word is an analogy, becomes a metaphor. The metaphor loses its people forget about its origin and it becomes just a term like any other. All right. If you know the etymology, you might find out where the metaphor once was. So let's practice. I'm going to show you two images, this and this. Okay. Are you getting any vibe? All right. Because the expression that you should be thinking about right now is, oh my God, yes, like a bull in a china shop. As a matter of fact, in Spanish, we have something very similar, como un elefante en una cacharrería. So it's basically a different animal, different store, but it's the same, the bottom line is the same, And I don't need to explain what that feels like or what that means. Forrest Gump. Okay, I don't believe you need to be a film buff to remember this quote from the opening scene of Forrest Gump. The title character says, "My mom used to say, or always said, that life is..." No, you're not getting any vibes? Come on. Life is like a box of chocolates. Now, this is not a convention. You will not find this in a dictionary. It was written for the movie, which means that it requires an explanation. It's not proverbial. So he says, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. All right. That is the difference, I repeat, between an idiom and an original analogy. Okay, we'll come to that later. Original analogies. Okay, this rather unsettling image makes you think of anything? No? Well, it's an idiom. Beating a dead horse, that's American, and flogging a dead horse, the same thing as the British equivalent. It means that it's useless. I mean, no matter how hard you flog the horse, it's not going to get up and run. I mean, the horse is dead, okay? So I have the sneaking suspicion that this is more familiar. You've heard this before. It's a haystack. What do you say about a haystack and about some other element there? No? The guy's looking for something? No? Okay. Many European languages have a similar image. It's like finding a needle in a haystack. Okay. What is that? Well, that is extremely difficult. But come to think of it, it's very difficult in a different way. A couple of slides ago, we said like pulling teeth. That was also difficult. But do you feel how the connotations are completely different? Now, this is the beauty of having range and having lots of options to choose from. You can decide what you want the listener to sort of experience or feel. Okay, we leave equality behind and we move on to superiority. So two expressions here. He's head and shoulders above the rest of us. Now there is a comparison there, which is he's better than us. Okay. I never thought that this, I mean, that's probably the subliminal message of this brand of shampoo, Head and Shoulders. Anyway, when you say get off your high horse, it means that you acknowledge that the person at least feels morally superior. So, I mean, don't be so self-righteous, just get off your high horse, there is implicit superiority acknowledged there. Inferiority, this is slightly more interesting. When you say nothing less than perfect or it was less than stellar, you are using, in one case, you use it for emphasis, and in the second case, it's an understatement. So nothing less than perfect means absolutely perfect, but you go in the opposite direction. When you say less than stellar, you probably mean really bad, embarrassing, mortifying. You're not proud of it. We are about to see another expression with the superlatives that goes along the same lines. So look at that. That was actually the name, the title of a sitcom, short-lived. Okay, look at that image. Can you see that right? The chandelier, the beautiful architecture, that romantic dinner was nothing short of, or nothing less than perfect. And we come to the superlative. Now check this out. The understatement, it was not my finest hour. Why? Why should a person say that? Because they don't want to say, I made a huge mistake. I wish I could go back in time and undo that. I'm not proud of it. But you don't say that. You go in a different way. It sounds even elegant. Not my finest hour. I'm not the greatest cook in the world means you're a horrible cook. Okay, so those are understatements. And then, unless you're Tina Turner, do you really want to say you're simply the best? You're the best. Remember what we said in the other video about abusing superlatives? Um, Compare that to this. She's in a class of her own, meaning she's one of a kind, one in a million. Her style is matchless. Her achievements are unparalleled. She's second to none, and she's unrivaled and remains peerless. I mean, all these adjectives have a superlative quality to them, right? So nice options to she's the most or she's the best. Okay. Now, this is my favorite part of the video. So welcome to original analogies. This is when a writer uses their creativity and they come up with beautiful comparisons that they achieve something with, sometimes which is really hard to explain. It's called hipotiposis in Spanish. I have looked for an equivalent in English. I can't find a word. It's a figure of speech. I'm sure there is a term, probably not of Greek origin, or maybe I really don't know, but it's when you cannot help but picturing something that you hear or read. I mean, that is the holy grail of literature when you see that. All right, check this out. Writing a book of poetry is like dropping a rose petal down the Grand Canyon and waiting for the echo. I'm not going to explain it. I am sure you understand what the author means by that. Okay, another. You see, you see that equipment. You see poor Kermit there, grinning, unaware of what they do to other frogs. Anyway, explaining a joke is like dissecting a frog. You understand it better, but the frog dies in the process. Now, I think it's the analogy that conveys that power. You know, that if you say when you explain a joke, you kill it, or you ruin it, or it's not funny anymore, I think it bears no comparison, right? This is something I read a long time ago. And Dustin Hoffman, this is Dustin Hoffman for those of you that are not into movies. He said that next to that kid, we all look like onions. And the kid was Mr. Brad Pitt. I think he has a point. I couldn't agree more with Dustin, all right? But I think it's funny and hilarious, like onions. Okay, you could have said like toads, but onions, it's unexpected, it's fresh, it's funny. And this is a quote attributed to many thinkers. I have done some research, and apparently it was first um, said by rock legend Frank Zappa. A mind is like a parachute, it doesn't work if it's not open. Think about the alternative to that. You might say, minds should be open. That's a good thing. That's when they really work. And but without the parachute reference, it's just nowhere near as effective. So exercises. Now this movie, this is a classic. It's from the late 90s. Does it ring any bells? By the way, look at those gloves. Now we are in a national lockdown. Everybody's wearing gloves, and it's kind of unsettling. Anyway, my point. What is the title of this movie? As Good as It Gets. You could say this is the best possible, whatever this is, it doesn't get any better. But the comparison, as good as it gets, I think it's hands down the best option. Now this is an idiom. Come on, you must have seen this before. Look at the shades. Look at, he says bro. He's trying to be cool as a cucumber. This is comparisons 101. Okay, quite basic. It seems to me you lived your life like what? Like a candle in the wind. All right, that is the song from 1973, Elton John. Yes, a comparison. Now this is not proverbial. It's not in everyday speech, but I think it's a rather popular reference. Okay. Anyway, it's effective because like I say, hypotyposis. It forces you to have a particular mental picture. Now, this is a T-shirt that I was really this close to buying a couple of years ago. I think it was on Mental Floss, the website. Avoid cliches like the plague. Remember, what is a cliche? A cliche is a trite expression. So, like the plague is a cliche, therefore it's supposed to be funny. And if you didn't get it at first, I just ruined the fun for you. But it's my job. I'm a teacher. I explain things. I over-explain things. As a final thought, I'm going to let you take a look at this photograph that I came across a couple of weeks ago. What do you see? Okay, now you have your own version of the image let's see. This is the text that I found next to that photograph. It says, "No matter how cool you are, you could be as cool as a cucumber. But you will never be as cool as this Mongolian shepherd posing in the wild with his AK-47 and his pet snow leopard." I will say no more. Hopefully, you have understood the power of the analogy. This is me signing off.